This lesson will introduce you to the concept of relative clauses. Relative clauses are a form of compound sentence, which you have a main clause, and then you have a subordinate clause, which is usually going to begin with a word like who, whose, whom, which, or that. So, in some examples in English, I know a man who is in charge. So our main clause, our main sentence is I know a man, and then who is in charge is a relative clause modifying man. It describes the man. The man whom I saw was evil. Again, our main clause is the man was evil, and whom I saw is the relative clause, again describing the man. The woman with whom I was dancing is tall. So the woman is tall is the main clause, it's the main idea, and then with whom I was dancing is describing the woman. That's the relative clause. Another example, I called the child to whom you gave the cards. I called the child. That's our main clause. That's the main idea. And then to whom you gave the cards is describing the child. It's the relative clause. Now, the one thing you should notice about these last two is that they don't start necessarily with a who, whose, or whom, but instead with the preposition. So with whom, to whom. Right, and you can probably already guess that with whom would be cum plus the ablative. To whom you gave the cards would be a dative, and so on. So, shift back here. There's some important parts of a relative clause that you need to know. So we'll take this last sentence. I called the child to whom you gave the cards. So again, to whom you gave the cards is our subordinate clause, our relative clause. I called the child is our main clause. And the first thing you should note is that this whom and the whom, whose, who, which, what, this is called the relative pronoun. And the relative pronoun points back to, right, so the noun that it points back to is called the antecedent. And so every relative clause is going to have a relative pronoun. They usually begin with the relative pronoun. And then it will point back to an antecedent in the main clause. And then the relative clause will also have its own verb. So in each of these, you gave is the verb. So you gave the cards to whom. I was dancing is the verb in this relative clause. I saw, whom I saw, there's the verb. And who is in charge, or is the verb there. So every relative clause is going to have a relative pronoun and a verb, and the two together are going to point back to the antecedent. That's the thing that it's describing. Now, in Latin, one thing you should keep in mind is that the relative pronoun, this is very, very important, the relative pronoun will match the antecedent in gender and number. Okay, so in gender and number only, necessarily. So the man who I know a man who is in charge. So the who is pointing to man. So this who is going to be singular and masculine. The man whom I saw was evil. So the whom I saw is pointing to man. So again, it's going to be singular and masculine. The woman with whom I was dancing. So we've got with whom pointing back to woman. That whom is going to be singular and feminine. And I called the child to whom you gave the cards. So pointing back to child, singular and masculine. All right, so the relative pronoun matches the antecedent in gender and number. The case is determined by the clause. And again, I'm going to point to our examples. So I know a man who is in charge. So if we just look at this clause, who is in charge, who is the subject here. So this who is going to be nominative. Singular, masculine, nominative. Even though man here is accusative, who is nominative. All right, so the case can change. The case of the relative pronoun and the case of the antecedent don't have to be the same. Another example, the man whom I saw was evil. So, whom I saw, here, it's accusative, right? Because I saw whom. So, the direct object, accusative. So this relative pronoun is going to be singular, masculine, and accusative. The woman with whom I was dancing is tall, so with whom I was dancing. Remember, it was singular and feminine because it's pointing back to woman, but since we've got the preposition with, cum takes the ablative, this whom will be in the ablative case. And then I called the child to whom you gave the cards, so to whom you gave the cards, where it's singular masculine because of child, but since the main verb is you gave, the cards is the direct object, the accusative, to whom is going to be the dative indirect object. So we need to have all the genders, all the cases, and all the numbers for our relative pronouns. And relative pronouns are just going to have to be memorized. They look very similar. People complain about all of the Q words in Latin. You can complain all you want, but you still have to memorize them. But there is some pattern, there is some logic to this. So, the nominatives, qui, quae, quod. So again, we're going to use the standard masculine, feminine, neuter setup, qui, quae, quod, who, which. And then the genitive, quius. Notice it's our old friend ius in the genitive singular. So quius, quius, quius. And qui, 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 it's our dative ending in I. Qui, qui, qui. And the accusative, quem, quam, quod. We still have the old pattern of the accusative in the neuter matches the nominative. And then our ablative, quo, qua, quo, this is pretty regular. Okay, so our accusatives end in M, that's a good thing. And our ablatives are like first and second declension ablatives. And then in the plural, qui, quae, quae. All right, so watch out for this quae. Context will tell you whether it is this qui, plural, or this qui, singular. Qui, quae, quae, quorum, quorum, quorum. Right, good ablative endings, or genitive plural endings that you've already come to know. Quibus, quibus, quibus. So these look like third declension. Quibus, quibus, quibus. Quos, quas, quae. So here they look like second declension and first declension, and quae matches our nominative, and quibus, quibus, quibus. Our dative and ablative plurals are the same. So just memorize the relative pronouns. Qui, quae, quod, quius, 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 qui, 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 quem, quam, quod, quo, qua, quo, qui, quae, quae, quorum, 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 quibus, 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 quos, quas, quae, quibus, quibus, quibus. Now, how do we put these to use? Let's take a look at translating some Latin relative clauses first. Vir qui ambulat bonus est. Now, my recommendation would be, when you're first encountering relative clauses, is to bracket them out. So, they usually start with a relative pronoun and end with a verb. So everything outside that's going to be your main clause. So vir bonus est, the man is good. Now you look at qui and you say, okay, well, it's qui, quae, quod, it's masculine, it's singular, and it's nominative. And our antecedent, which usually comes right before, is the man. So the man who is walking, who, because it's nominative, the man who is walking is good. Vidi virum qui ambulat. All right, so taking my advice, I'm going to bracket off, starting with the relative pronoun, ending with a verb. The thing outside is my main clause, vidi virum. I saw a man. All right, I saw a man, or I saw the man. Qui, all right, we're going to guess that it's the antecedent is the word right before it, the man. Qui is masculine. Man is masculine. It's singular. Virum is singular. But this qui is nominative, so it's going to be the subject in this relative clause. I saw the man who is walking. Vidi femininam quae ambulat. All right, I'll again take my advice, bracket off the quae ambulat. I saw the woman. Quae now is feminine because our antecedent is feminine. Feminine, singular, but also nominative again. I saw the woman who is walking. So the difference here is in gender. And now scio feminam quacum saltabas. All right, now we've got our relative pronoun. We're going to bracket that off. Our main clause, I know the woman. And quacum, referring back to our antecedent, qua feminine, singular, just like feminam is feminine and singular, but because we have the preposition cum, it needs to be ablative. And remember, we append cum to qua, so I know the woman with whom you were dancing. Saltabas. And one more, perdo urbem in qua habitavisti. So our relative pronoun there, we could bracket it off here, but let's push it back and include the preposition in qua, ending with a verb. So our main clause, perdo urbem. I am destroying the city. Qua, our antecedent is urbem, it's singular, it's feminine. Here it's ablative, because it's the object of the preposition in. And our verb habitavisti, so I am destroying the city in which you lived. Habitavisti. Let's take a look at some English sentences and translate them into Latin. So, I love the city from which you came. Let's bracket off the English relative clause, right? So, which is a relative pronoun. We're going to push it back and include the preposition. And we're going to start with our main clause. I love the city. Amo urbem. Now, urbem is feminine, and it's singular. So our relative pronoun has to be feminine and singular. And then we have to do from which. So X takes an ablative, so we want feminine, singular, ablative relative pronoun. X, qua, and then you came, venisti. I love the city, ex qua venisti. Let's try another one. I know the father who is walking. So let's bracket off our relative clause. I know the father. Scio patrem. Right, get rid of cover the easy part. And then we say, okay, well, father is masculine and singular. So our relative pronoun has to be masculine and singular. And then I look at this and I say, okay, well, what function is it? It's who is walking. He's doing the action, so we want it to be nominative. So, qui ambulat. Scio patrem qui ambulat. And finally, the man to whom you gave the gifts is walking. So let's bracket off our relative pronoun, a relative clause. So to whom you gave the gifts. All right, so that's our full idea. And that leaves us with the relative clause, the man is walking. So we can start with our wir, our man. It's masculine, it's singular. And then we look and we say, okay, to whom you gave, so it's a dative indirect object. So wir, qui, dona is accusative, it's a direct object, and dedisti, you gave. So wir, qui dona dedisti, and then we put our verb from the main clause, ambulat. And if we were to translate from Latin, we would bracket off qui to the first verb, qui dona dedisti, and we'd be left with a main clause, wir ambulat. So if you focus on bracketing off your relative clauses when you encounter them in Latin, start with the relative pronoun, end with a verb, you should be okay.